Our people have been the first hydrologists. We've been the first geologists. We've been the first astronomers. We've been the first architects in this landscape. And so what I try to do is bring those concepts of knowledge and wisdom, that proverbial encyclopedia that's gone back thousands of years in this landscape, bring it forward in those elements that we've learned to look at resiliency.
That's Phoebe Suina. She's an engineer and consultant whose work includes restoring watersheds and landscapes here in the Southwest, including land that's been devastated by wildfires and floods. She grew up in New Mexico on Pueblo land where she was steeped in Native traditions, and she brings her community's values and ways of seeing into the work. She's an amazing person with a great story, which we'll hear in just a moment. Please stay with us. If you live in Colorado, come join Quivira's new agrarian program for a summer field day in the beautiful town of Fountain on June 28th. Co-hosted by Quivira Coalition, National Young Farmers Coalition, and Colorado State University Extension, this event will get your boots dirty touring 3 neighboring ranches demonstrating the successes and challenges of regenerative grazing. Come learn practical tools that ranchers and their employees can use to create resilient professional relationships. While this field day is designed for those active in or pursuing a career in agriculture, anyone interested is welcome. You can find more information at quiviracoalition.org/events. Quivira is Quivira. And one more announcement, help Quivira unlock $40,000. If you value resilient working lands and Quivira's programs, like this podcast, now is a great time to donate. From now until the end of September, any donation or membership initiated will be matched dollar for dollar up to $40,000. Even $5 a month pays for crucial programming like network building and mental health support for the new agrarian program apprentices. Whether it's $5 or $500, your contribution enables crucial land stewardship work across the land you love. More information at quiviracoalition.org/match. And now to our program. I'm delighted to welcome Phoebe Suina. She is founder and owner of High Watermark, a project management and environmental consulting firm, and we're recording in her office in Bernalillo, New Mexico. Welcome to Down to Earth.
Good morning, Mary Charlotte. This is just an honor to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to share any thoughts or insights and perspectives to folks listening.
So, you grew up in New Mexico on the Pueblos of San Felipe and Cochiti, and you went to Albuquerque Academy for high school. You went to Dartmouth College for undergraduate and advanced degrees in engineering and management. But learning about your work, it seems like a big part of your education is what you learned when you were young and learned from your family on the land in the Pueblos where you grew up. And I was wondering if you could tell us how that early education affected the way that you do engineering and project management.
Thank you so much for that question. And yes, I'm so blessed and honored to be from those 2 communities and Pueblos, because what I've learned as I've grown up is we still have a lot of traditions and cultural and teachings and lessons and core values that we still carry today as Pueblo people. And all of that expertise and knowledge has been brought down through generations by oral tradition, by lessons, by activities throughout the year, both traditional activities and family-focused activities. Embedded in all of those activities are lessons and core values of how to be in the world that we live in our environment, how to be within community, and how to interact with each other in a respectful way, as well as with the environment. And so as I learn through those lessons and the teachings of my parents, my aunts, my uncles, grandparents, great uncles, all of those elders within the Pueblo and those that carry leadership positions within the Pueblo, been honored and blessed to have the ability to have our people still within the landscape that we've lived in since time immemorial.
What are some of those lessons and core values that you're talking about?
Utmost is respect. Respect of everything around us, respect of others in the room, respect of ourselves, respect of everything that we try to live in balance with in our environment. And so what does that mean, right? What does that mean to have those core values based upon respect? Well, that means part of it is also being humble, knowing that we can't control everything, having that humility, having the responsibility as a core value to live mindfully, to live in a good way, in a positive way, and that what we do, one of the other core values is what we do and how we live today is not necessarily for ourselves, but for the community and for our children and those yet to be born. So what we do and how we carry ourselves and the work that we do, say in the larger landscape, like in the country, in the world, is all goes back to those core values of it's not necessarily for us, but everybody else as well. But we have to do it in balance as another core value.
High Watermark is a unique company in many ways. It's Native American and women-owned and led, and a lot of your work is serving Native communities in New Mexico, and you use these principles that you were talking about as well as engineering tools. Talk about the disaster recovery work that you do. Like, what kinds of disasters, what are the causes, and then how do you think of that kind of those values of respect and of resilience when you're doing the planning and the execution of the restoration work?
I think what I would like to share in response to that question is back to the core values of resiliency, right? And back to what I shared a few minutes ago about us as Pueblo people being in this landscape. In order to live in the middle of New Mexico in the Southwest, we've seen since time immemorial the changes in climate, where we'll have drought, we'll have a lot of rain. And so one of the lessons that I learned from some of the elders was that we have to live in that balance. And so taking that approach with my company is trying to meld the formal educational principles that we learn, say, in an engineering course or in physics or in mathematics. And I love math and I love physics. And I can see the elements of what the grandpas and grandmas were talking about in what I see in formal education. But where formal education looks at the zoning in of a particular concept, kind of segregating it. So we learn about physics in a physics class. We learn about math in a math class. We don't have a class that incorporates physics and math and legal and ethics all together.
Yeah, the proverbial silos, as opposed to a holistic approach.
Exactly. So where I like to utilize and lead the company and our staff is to try to look at the comprehensive approach. So when we come to an engineering, maybe other engineering companies here in New Mexico will only look at, say, a road project, to give you an example. And the road has culverts underneath and saying, okay, well, we want to design a road that can pass 1,000 cubic feet per second because that's what's been flowing across this road. But if you just look up 500 feet or 1,000 feet, you can see in the landscape beyond the footprint and prism of the road and beyond the culvert, well, actually, if we can mitigate the flows and drop the energy of the water coming down this hill, then we don't have to convey 1,000 CFS within 5 minutes. We can drop the energy out. That'll mitigate the soil coming down, the erosion, and then it'll be maybe 100 CFS. But in order to do that project, a road engineer is going to say, well, all I know is 1,000 CFS is going to come across this, and that's what I got to engineer for, because that's where I am seeing my box of my problem and my challenge. So I'm coming up with a solution to convey 1,000 CFS. Instead of looking outside the proverbial box, to look beyond comprehensively and say, well, actually, if that hill could have some vegetation on it, or we could mitigate the rain coming off, or what's going on up there? Why do we have, something where it's accelerating the water? Oh, okay. That's the outside the box solution.
Now, is that a real example?
It is a real example. And it's something we looked at after the post-Las Conchas fire in one of the communities, where there was a road, could only convey 2,000 cubic feet per second, but it was really the impact of the fire, and then between the fire edge and where the road is, which was about 10 miles, how could we utilize the entire watershed to drop the energy, drop the sediment, slow the water down, let the water not control it, but let the water kind of do its thing and flow like a river should, and what we see in a balanced system. So you drop it out, drop the energy, drop the sediment, then you're only conveying back to 1,000 CFS, cubic feet per second, versus 10,000.
And that has so many other positive effects.
Absolutely. And what we've known, and back to one of your previous questions, is here in this landscape, our people have been the first hydrologists. We've been the first geologists. We've been the first astronomers. We've been the first architects in this landscape. And so what I try to do is bring those concepts of knowledge and wisdom, that proverbial encyclopedia that's gone back thousands of years in this landscape, bring it forward in those elements that we've learned to look at resiliency. And so one of the aspects of that is water. How do we have an environment here in New Mexico to then soak in the water, so we're not seeing the flash flooding that we see nowadays after a large monsoonal rain, and then we see the quick runoff in a concrete channel, because a concrete channel is meant without any roughage along the channel, any way for the channel to go side to side. It's shooting it straight down. So of course it's going to accelerate the flow. Whereas if you look at a meandering mountain stream, it goes left to right, hits some rocks, hits some dirt, soaks in, hits some veg, soaks in some more. So that's a balanced system. And so when we look at solutions, or we look at activities or initiatives, back to your question, is helping communities look outside the box to go back to a balanced ecosystem, so that our ecosystems can then absorb that water. And we see that coming back and looking at a full hydrological cycle, from all the elements that NOAA has shown on that hydrological cycle, from evaporation to clouds to rain and snow to then rivers and then aquifer systems.
Right. NOAA being
National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration.
Right. I would imagine that when you're doing the kind of work that you do, there's been a wildfire, let's say, and you're doing restoration, and you suggest solutions like this, like instead of a concrete channel, have a meander, and, let's plant some vegetation here so that there's more water infiltration, that some people say, yes, that makes so much sense, but also, do you get pushback?
Absolutely. And we saw that I saw that personally after Cerro Grande fire, when I helped manage the funding that Los Alamos National Laboratory had after the Cerro Grande funding, when we started to look at watershed approaches to mitigate the post-wildfire flooding after Cerro Grande on the laboratory landscape, but also Las Conchas. When I did a quick analysis for my own Pueblo of Cochiti, looking at maps, looking at burn severity, knowing what I had seen after Cerro Grande, and saying, we've got a concern here. And I got a lot of pushback from federal agencies, and initially they thought, well, you don't have a concern because at most you're going to see is 2,000 cubic feet per second coming down. So you don't need to do all of these elements to mitigate post-wildfire flooding. But what we did see is on a normal monsoonal event of 1/2 inch to 1 inch of rain, a high flood response. So the landscape ended up saying, no, actually, this is what's going to happen. And so it became data points, and that's where pictures, videos, data becomes the story for federal agencies, for those formally educated, to say, okay, now we trust you that you now have a data point, you have pictures, you have videos that show that, yes, there is flooding. So whether I knew it or not, or I believed it, I had to demonstrate that in order to justify support or federal funds to come to help some of our communities in New Mexico.
And what's embedded in what you're saying is kind of listening to the landscape itself.
Absolutely. And so I was telling a colleague a couple of weeks ago, we were out along the rivers in New Mexico, and we talk about our elders and our people that came before us. That I've learned a great deal on how the landscape talks to you. Well, what does that really mean? It's about paying attention to what's happening in the landscape. So yes, a tree can tell you something because you're seeing the health of the tree, you're seeing how its leaves are growing, you're seeing how the root system is. The sand tells you something because you can see the deposition. Is it sandy soil? Is there organic matter in that sand base? Is it dark because it's coming from post-wildfire flooding? All of these ways of looking at these markers or indications or high water marks, where you can see how high the water has come through on a high flood event.
That's why you call it that.
That's why we call it high water mark, because that's how high the flood has happened in a landscape. And when you have post-wildfire flooding, when you're bringing down that flow is bringing down that dark sediment, it actually creates a line, and you can see the high water mark.
Right. You mentioned concrete channels and the damage that they can do. What are some other examples of engineering initiatives of the past that you've had to address and maybe even undo in your work?
Thank you for that. And I think one of the things I want to say is we're all learning together.
Yeah.
Professional engineers, community members, and bringing this knowledge and wisdom forward without fully understanding how water flows and moves through our landscape here in New Mexico. So when we look back at data, when a lot of designs were, engineers will have a design criteria. I'm going to design this structure for a 10-year precipitation event, or a 25-year, or a 50-year, or a 100-year. Do we really have 100 years of data of precipitation in any particular watershed here in New Mexico? Not of gauged precipitation, very few places in New Mexico. And we know in New Mexico we have monsoonal rains. So in a 47 square mile watershed, it'll rain in one area and not anywhere throughout the rest of the watershed. So that's where in New Mexico, why I'm sort of caveating what I'm saying is we just have to be mindful that when we design a structure, whether it's a berm, whether it's a dam, whether it's culverts, low water crossing, roads, channels, we also have to acknowledge that we didn't have a lot of data, especially those that are like 30 years old, when that original structure was designed. So as we look forward, we're all learning maybe that didn't work, or maybe it had this collateral impact to the environment that we didn't consider, or that the engineer didn't consider when first recommending that structure. So to your question, yes, I've worked on a lot of areas where we have culverts, where there's a lot of sedimentation through that system. So culverts will get blocked up, and then it becomes a failed structure. Or berms, where we didn't maybe the berms were designed for a 10-year event, but they weren't designed for a 10-year precipitation event with a large wildfire completely denuding the landscape, which then elevates the post-wildfire flooding and then inundates a berm or inundates a conveyance structure or a channel. So there's all these changes in the environment that affect the ability for any engineered system or structure to actually perform like it was designed. And so I think we also have to acknowledge that engineers are developing these design criterias and reworking them. And what I like to do with my fellow colleagues is say, let's look at making a more resilient engineered system, maybe has lower operation and maintenance, because you can design a system, say a gabion structure, which is a chain link fence basically with a bunch of rocks in it. What is the maintenance cost if that system fails or if that structure fails? Can the local community go back out there and rebuild it? Or is it so expensive that it can't be rebuilt on, say, every 10-year basis?
Right.
So how do we look at the landscape, reading how to be in balance with the landscape, with water flows? I love water, so my mind always thinks about water and how water moves through our environment. So how do we develop and live and look at structures or best management practices so that we can live in that balance and then also help the waters do what they need to do, like streams and rivers, to meander back and forth?
I just want to say I really appreciate how you answered that question, because you are demonstrating your principles, which is bringing people together with humility, with inclusiveness, with listening to all voices, and knowing that most people aren't necessarily trying to mess things up, but we learn from the past and try to move forward. In the principles that you're using, like let's say, you're looking at the maintenance cost, you're looking at whether a community can rebuild this without too much effort, maybe with their own labor more than expensive materials. Is there an element of like imitating nature's own processes, what we call biomimicry, in the way that you're thinking about design?
Absolutely, because we're part of our environment. And our people here, Pueblo people, how I've learned again through the lessons and stories is they've been part of the landscape. I always like to say this to groups when I'm talking about water. If I'm talking in front of 50 or 100 people, I look at all of you as 50 water drops, 100 water drops. We're part of the hydrological cycle. So if we can shift our mind to think that we're part of our environment, we can also think about what our impacts are and how we can benefit our environment, because we want to be sustainable. As I said, one of the core values is how do we make sure our environment is livable and sustainable for our kids and future generations. So in thinking that way, then we can think about our place and our solutions and whatever work that we do, whether it's on policy, whether it's on engineering, whether it's on analysis, technical analysis, whether it's on writing, or whether it's on developing podcasts, anything that we work on. How do we contribute to the balancing of the entire system, even our social systems? So it is in that mindset, trying to bring people together to say, we're in this together, let's work together. Even when we may have differing views. I said this at a water meeting just recently, is I'm looking at you, Mary Charlotte, and I can see behind you, but I can't see behind me. So I need you to tell me what's behind me and give me that perspective, because I can't see everything.
Very interesting. What you said, and this is maybe a little off topic, but it reminded me, there was I think a poet who was looking at a stream that was like a body of water and then went into a waterfall and then turned into a stream again. And he said, before we're born, we're all part of the same stream. And then we turn into lots of little differentiated water droplets. And then at the end, we go back into the stream. And that just, I don't know, it just reminded me of what you're saying.
Absolutely. And like I tell my daughter, we're taught that every snowflake is different. right? There's no one snowflake that's the same, that looks the same, has the same crystalline structure. That's how people are. Yeah. So we're all snowflakes, or we're all walking bodies of water, because science has confirmed that we're mostly water as humans walking the earth today. So we are elements of that hydrological cycle. We're all connected. So a water drop that enters one person may enter another person because they drink it 100 years later or 200 years later. And that's really, when I think about it, that's crazy. That's like big picture, right? So we are all connected in some way, and it's just being mindful of our place, and back to that humility, that what I do eventually will affect you. One of our my brothers talks about, my Indian brothers talks about, the proverbial, you throw a rock in a pond and you see all the ripples. Eventually a ripple, however large it is, will eventually reach out to the entire pond.
Meanwhile, with those really beautiful and I think deep principles, you have to work with the reality of, all these different state, federal, local, community, bureaucratic, power games, egos, all of those things that are coming together. Private landowners, public land. You seem to have really, have cultivated a way to deal with those challenges. What do those challenges look like?
I think it comes back down to that core value of respect. The difficult part is back to respect, even of myself, going into those places, into those situations. And when it's tough, I've been in very heated meetings when I recognize that I'm not being respected. And so you have to also respect yourself, right? So sometimes I have to wait and be patient. Maybe now is not the time. Maybe that individual is not ready to hear what I bring to the table. But I'm still going to do my homework. I'm still going to work on the issue. I deal a lot with that with local governments, with different communities, our own communities. My grandma, bless her soul, she always used to tell me, working for your people is some of the hardest work to do. It's hard in that it's difficult, but it's hard in that it's your heart. So you wear, and I wear my heart on my arm. My children, my family worry about me, right? When I'm going into these very challenging and difficult situations. But how I try to navigate that is something I learned from my grandma, from Cochiti. She was so graceful because she always remembered to be respectful, even when people may not be coming to the table with that respect. What can you do except be respectful? And eventually, hopefully, as my partner, he says, the light bulb will come on and they'll say, okay, let me put aside my negative feelings. Let me put aside my ego. And it is challenging, as my grandma used to say, is there were times when people mistreated her or said bad things about her or gossiped about her or said she wasn't doing this or that. And what she would do is go to them and tell them, "Goatsi," that means how are you? And say, I'm here, here's open arms. And I try to carry that forward, because in any situation, nobody's going to agree 100%. Nobody is. Even if we're all in agreement, we're all going east. There's going to be disagreements, and are we going to go on this path, on this road, in the sky, on the ground, on train? There's going to be many ways to get east. So the challenge is, right, to be in those meetings, whatever hat I wear for the state of New Mexico, with different hats that I wear on different boards and commissions, we don't all agree. And also stakeholders don't all agree when we're listening to a challenging situation. but it's making sure I carry respect, even when a meeting gets out of control, is to be in the moment, listen, because there are elements of why people are coming to the table with their positive view and their negative views. So like I shared earlier, we have to look at what are all of these views so that we can then all move forward together on whatever issue it is. And sometimes it's move forward now because we finally say, okay, we're going to put everything on the table and we're going to agree to disagree, but we still move forward because we've agreed to disagree. And sometimes we don't agree to disagree, right? And then we can't move forward.
But you're saying this works.
It works.
This method works.
It works. And it has worked since time immemorial. Our communities have always had consensus in major decisions. We all our Pueblo communities, they have this structure of council or groups where they all get together with respect and put in the input, and it sometimes, to get anybody to agree, 5 people to agree, let alone 40 people to agree, is in this day and age seems monumental. But when you do, what I've seen in my career is when you have people agree, maybe they say, okay, I'm going to agree and I'm going to wait and see how this works out, right? So I've come where I've gone to a leadership, whether it's local government, tribal government, state government, and say, okay, trust me, let's try this. We're going to walk down this way and we're going to have milestones and say, checkpoints and say, is this working? And if it's not working, that's okay too. We'll adjust, we'll evolve, but it's better than just sitting here and doing nothing.
Or fighting and never getting anywhere.
Right? And I work across from Democrats to Republicans to independents. I really like boards and commissions and groups when there's multiple perspectives and people coming from multiple ideas and multiple backgrounds. I really enjoy that type of work because when it does move forward, it's awesome to see that we have consensus. And for many years, I think in many places here in New Mexico, that actually did happen. But what I also say is when I'm in a contentious situation and there is a person sitting there and saying, hey, I have a concern. If we don't address that person's concern and we just move forward, often I see that one concern come and bite us in the backside down the road and said, oh, we should have addressed that concern because then we wouldn't be here at this, at this big obstacle further down the road.
And you literally have a technique called consensus-based planning that is part of what you offer in your services. Absolutely.
And I think that wisdom and that knowledge and that process came from a good friend, my friend Jeff Goebel, who works on consensus building here in New Mexico. And it was just my great blessing that I came across this gentleman to learn that there is this way of working across multiple perspectives and integrating that input so we can move forward. But what was so neat in my learning and my education and that kind of work was that it really aligned with how I would see our traditional leaders and our social governments within our Pueblo communities operate. And so to me, it really aligned with who I am as a Pueblo person as well.
So this is a show about regenerative agriculture, and I'd like to ask you about how the work that you do affects agricultural land, agricultural communities.
Thank you for bringing that. So I love to work on water, and farmers, me included out there, we know how important water is. Water is the drop that goes through every living being, including our farm fields. And there's that adage, and I keep hearing it in different water meetings as the state of New Mexico enters this Water Security Planning Act endeavor that was passed by the state legislature last year. and now is being implemented through the Interstate Stream Commission, we talk about how do we tackle this planning and why is it important? Well, for farmers and agriculture and regenerative mindsets and those that are in that community and thinking about that, water is a key aspect in that cycle in our farming. So by the work that I do, even on policy, it affects how that water drop will be coming down the Rio Grande, then through the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District infrastructure to my field along the Middle Rio Grande. And so we have to, I think, continue to really think about the big picture, all the way from burned areas, Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon, Black Fire, the Cerro Pelado fire, Las Conchas, and how all of those from the top of the watershed will impact our farmers and those that are trying to make a sustainable, balanced ecosystems within their environment, say a farm field, or their business if they're in the business of agriculture, farming. And how do we make sure that we think about all the elements of that hydrological cycle and of our watersheds? So if the top of the watershed is not healthy, then that really does impact us down here along the main river stem of the Rio Grande, and the ability for our watersheds to deliver enough water, but also clean water, as well as consistent water. So back to what we talked about earlier, flash flooding. How do we mitigate flash flooding? Well, it's allowing our watersheds to be healthy so that they can soak in. Then it comes back out in springs as a slow flow, and more likely a perennial flow that we can then have better scheduling for our farming practices in the summer.
So let's talk specifically about some of the techniques that have been most useful and successful. I mean, engineering or cultural practice and the way those things overlap. Like, what are some things that you actually do that make watersheds more healthy?
So actually last week I went and we're working on some of the watersheds that are impacting, and we're planning right now to look at structures within the floodplain and on the sides of heavily damaged watersheds that were burned by, say, Las Conchas or catastrophic fires in Hermit's Peak, and looking at either Zuni bowls, one rock check dams, at some log dams that are minimal. So you do smaller structures so that in the event of failure, then it's not a catastrophic failure. So in my work at Los Alamos, we did the Pajarito flood retention structure after the Cerro Grande fire in the East Jemez Mountain region. And what that ended up demonstrating to me, it was important because it protected critical national security facilities and had to be done right away after Cerro Grande, but that becomes a 1-point protection system for an entire watershed, but also a 1-point failure. So as I worked on the Cerro Grande project, we did multiple mitigation projects watershed wide in particular watersheds. And so it then looked like if this one failed, then it wasn't so devastating. It's
like distributing your risk.
Distributing risk, distributing energy, dropping the energy out in the landscape, dropping the water, allowing the water to slow down so it can soak in. All of those elements and concepts are so needed. So when we look at 1-point, so back to engineering, if we look at a 1-point protection system, that's a 1-point failure risk.
Potentially, yeah.
Potentially. And we see that. Dams, again, like I was saying earlier, we don't have enough data to really look at a 100-year dam design or a water control design. Control is the word I'm looking at in those designs. We don't have enough data, as well as the uncertainty comes in with climate change. We have hotter and then colder, drought, and then a lot of rain. And so we don't have the data points to know, okay, how can we design a structure that will indeed handle a 100-year precip event with a denuded landscape? You have to engineer a behemoth dam in order to handle that. And it doesn't make balanced sense, whether we're talking about from the watershed level or from a fiscal level as well. Back to your question of, we still have to operate in a system on fiscal year budgets, justifications, federal agencies, state agencies, bureaucracy. But when I look at it like that, does that fit in that? And it doesn't to me.
But this brings up something which is really important and sort of fascinating to me to talk about, and that is that the kinds of structures that you are talking about are made, they're small scale, they're made with natural materials, they're distributed across the landscape, they require low technology, very, very little technology, except maybe, moving, like machines to move rocks around or something like that. And there's kind of this idea that so many people have in their heads, oh, the more technological it is, the better it is. And of course, the people who build dams and build those big things have a fiscal interest in doing that. So you've got a lot to counter. I mean, both the interest, the financial interest, and just this psychology. I see it everywhere. I see it every day. Technologies, big tech is going to save us.
Absolutely. And I think it comes with the perspective that we want the proverbial silver bullet, the one solution. Like, okay, I'm going to give it to you. And often, I've spoken at different seminars or panels, and what I've learned is it's going to take a lot of work. And then once you get there, it's going to take work again. And then once you get there, you achieve balance, it's going to take work again. And that's what we learn. So every year as a demonstration, since I know there's a lot of farmers in your listening pool, is as farmers, we know we plant. It takes a lot of work. The next day we have to go back up to the field because things have changed. It takes a lot of work. We go and go and go and keep farming and keep farming. And one of my elders, family members told me, said, as Pueblo people, we're taught this lesson in our traditional activities, but in our everyday activities like farming, this work, this balancing of our farm field. We go to bed every day after putting a lot of time and energy in our farm field, getting all the weeds out, making sure everything is irrigated and ready to continue growing. And then we wake up the next day and something has changed, and it requires more maintenance and more time and more energy into our farm fields. And this elder, one of my elders, family members shared with me, and that's not a bad thing, because it reminds us, to your question or to your point earlier, that we don't take things for granted, that we do have to work, that living and being in balance takes work. And that's okay, because that leaves us as humble people, that leaves us as people willing to do the work, right?
And I think, fear comes into it. Like, people are scared that something terrible is going to happen and they just want to be protected from it at all costs. And it doesn't, as you're saying, it doesn't really work that way. The more protected you are, the greater the risk that protective structure is going to fail.
Absolutely. And I have a great example on that. So when I was working within community on a post-wildfire mitigation strategy, Army Corps came in and said, hey, I have a solution. We're just going to put a big old dam here. We're going to design it, invest in it, justify it. We have the support from the feds and the state. Let's just do it. And I was like, no, I don't think that's a solution, because I had learned that if we do a watershed approach, but what that provides us is, like you shared earlier, is those lower, smaller systems then provides multiple protection systems. So one of my charges after one of the post-wildfires above a particular Pueblo community, that one of the elders said, all I want is our people to be safe. That's your number one priority. Make sure the people are safe. Make sure that they can get out of the community in the indeed it rains. Because we can't tell Mother Nature not to rain. We're as Pueblo people, we're farmers, we want it to rain. We want the rain for our corn and our crops so that we can live our way of life. So we have to pray for rain. We have to wish for rain. And I said, okay, so it's to protect the people. So we developed a system where if this one particular measure failed, it gave us 2 more hours. If this one failed, the next one failed, it gave us 2 more hours. So we had built into the system, the flood mitigation system, we had a system that of failure and additional hours and minutes for people to get out of harm's way if Mother Nature wanted to rain in our upper watersheds, versus having a dam and just being 1 point of protection and 1 point failure. If that dam went, we would only have, say, 15 to 30 minutes to get out of its way. So that also provides us that ability to have good planning, but also bring the people along to say, okay, everybody, this one structure failed. If you didn't believe me that it was imminent, well, here's a data point. Next structure fails. If you still don't believe that we're in danger, you have another data point. Because people also need to see for themselves as well to mobilize. Because we see that Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon as a prime example, or other fires around the state. People don't believe that flooding is going to impact them. So the system that we developed enabled the community to come along and say, okay, now we're at our second structure that's about to fail. And then they're, okay, I believe you now.
So in that instance, the dam didn't get built and you built these other multiple structures.
Exactly. Working with the watershed, working with the natural features, the natural elevations and the natural swells in the watershed to drop the energy out of the water, to drop the sediment and drop the debris before it got to the main village.
Now, the people who were in favor of the dam, did they come around?
Yes. The Army Corps of Engineers, in fact, we went back out, did a site visit, and they said, wow, the system really did work.
Yeah. Very interesting. I mean, you work with all of these agencies, like lots of letters, EPA, BIA, BLM, FEMA. Are they ever more open to the kind of perspectives that you're talking about? I mean, do you see a shift in attitude?
Yes and no. It really depends on the people within those alphabets of agencies. So you can have policy that says, like in FEMA, you can have a policy that says you will look at natural best management practices. You will look at natural features. But if the person comes from a very strong engineering background, or from that mindset of a dam is the only way of protection, even though it's in the policy, now that we've got it in the policy, it's still not getting implemented because that individual is coming to the table. And what we see with federal agencies, with state agencies, and any governmental or organization, is we see people within the organization, once they get educated and once they get on board, they're like, okay, well, we're going to ship you off to North Carolina or Florida. So we're always having to re-educate. And sometimes it is tiring. But then I think back to my example of being a farmer and having to go back out to the farm field and take the weeds out again, water the plants again. So it's just an iterative process.
Well, and those people that got shipped off to North Carolina are bringing that knowledge to North Carolina.
Exactly. So we see that whether from the Bureau of Land Management, EPA, FEMA, NRCS, all of these federal agencies. And so it is important. Sometimes I'm human. I get tired too. But I think back, and actually this opportunity to re-explain it reminds me to, again, it's okay. It's okay to go back to the farm field and have to get the weeds out, have to water the plants again. It's okay.
Tell us about the farming that you do.
Oh, I love the farming. We're teaching, me and my partner, Rex, and I are teaching our kids to farm sustainably. So we do no-till farming within our farm field, and we're growing.
On Pueblo land?
It's actually off Pueblo land.
Oh, okay.
Yes, it's just on the southern border of Cochiti and the northern border of Santo Domingo. My partner, he's from Santo Domingo, and as I shared earlier, I'm from Cochiti, Pueblo. So it's in this little slice between the two Pueblo jurisdictions, and we have a 7-acre farm field. It has alfalfa on the east side, and then we have about an acre of food crop field. So in the food crop field, we grow corn, squashes, melons, peas, gourds, different traditional crops that we use throughout the year. So I love it because I get to spend time with the kids, with him, and it's a lot of hard work, but it reinvigorates our lessons on Keres, our oral tradition and our language, to share and talk Keres in the farm field, as well as those concepts that I was talking about earlier about core values and hard work and everything that we can learn in the field. I love it. And then also with the no-tilling, we're seeing also elements of worms, earthworms in our field, which are a sign that we have good soil. So we can show the kids that. And that's a demonstration of biology, of different elements of soil too, how our soils can be clay or sandy. So my son loves rocks and soil, so he gets concepts of that in science, right? So now when he goes to his book and says, oh, I know what sandy soil is, I know what clay is, and he can understand that as well. And then also in our farm field, we have an area where we're doing, I guess you would call it, native flowers and forbs, so that we can hopefully have butterflies and bees coming in and around our farm field.
Do you have any animals?
We do. We have dogs, and we are hoping, well, my kids are hoping to get some farm animals like a pig, or my son wants a horse. We're trying to figure out how that could then balance our ecosystem in our little 7-acre parcel.
Right. 7 acres is small, but you can do a lot on 7 acres.
Yes. And like I said, we have our alfalfa field that's been no-till. What we do on that alfalfa field, let me just share this, is so usually our last crop, our last cut, we actually leave it. And the local deer and elk actually come and graze in there, and they fertilize it. So in the late fall or early winter, we'll come in there and we'll kind of rake out some of the droppings from the elk and the deer to distribute it more evenly, and that becomes our fertilizer for the next year. So we try to do, as I was sharing earlier, like a balanced system even within our farm field of alfalfa.
Now, is that part of Pueblo tradition, is sharing the product of your farming with wildlife?
Actually, it is. I remember during COVID when it was just me and the kids, because my partner, he was a tribal official that year, and the deer were coming in, the other animals were coming into our food crop field, and my dad reminded me, he's like, that's why your grandpa always said plant enough to share with the wildlife so that at least you'll have something at the end of the season. So yes, that is a concept.
Do you eat a lot of the food that you produce? In other words, is that a big part of your diet?
Yes. If we produce enough to make it all the way through. So right now we're in sweet pea season. So we picked last week, and that's what we ate over the weekend, shared with family members. We also get purslane in our field, so we like to pick that. My son loves purslane, so we love to saute that and mix that with beans and other peas in our diet as well. And then our corn, last year we grew squash, so for probably a month and a half, that's all we ate every day was squash and eggs, squash, and corn. Yeah, and so we love to integrate it within our diet.
One of the things that you have to deal with and that we all have to deal with, not only in New Mexico, but nationwide, worldwide, is erosion. And it's one of those things that nobody talks about. It's incredibly important. You can't get a politician to even think about it. How do you think about erosion? How do you deal with it? How big a role does it play in your work, in your engineering?
Absolutely. I mean, I think about erosion as well, hand in hand with water, because water is the mobility of erosion, where it transports sediment. So when we look at dams up and along the Rio Grande, one of the considerations that engineers and those federal agencies that are operating those dams is the sedimentation. So if we can hold and have healthy soil within our landscapes, our watersheds, our hill systems, in good balanced land use and management, then that mitigates erosion, as well as slowing the water down will mitigate erosion. So I love to talk about erosion and sedimentation too, because it's a component of how we can have a balanced land management system, whether it's within a third of an acre of our land, whether it's in development of road systems, development of engineering structures, development of irrigation ditches, acequias, any type of structure. Even land development. Are we going to have more pavement versus some type of mitigation of water coming off that pavement, or asphalt, or channelization of water? It all comes back to, in my mind, back to how do we manage the water so it can soak in, so we have healthier soils and we can get those grasses and other plants and vegetation to grow so that the roots hold the soil down as well.
Do you work with acequias?
Yes, we do. Up in Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon, we've been working with the New Mexico Acequia Association on trying to figure out how to, one, work with them on the impacts of the wildfire, but also how to look at the next year to 20 to 50 years in a resilient frame of mind.
Do you feel like acequias contribute to resilience of the landscape?
Yes, they can. And it depends too, right? So it depends on the watershed. It depends on how the Acequia Association, that particular acequia, how the parisantes and how the mayordomos are managing the acequia, what they do. It goes back down to how do we live within our landscape with a balanced perspective.
So what are your hopes for New Mexico's landscapes and its people in terms of living with greater resilience, greater respect for land and water? Like, do you see a shift occurring in the minds of people in the way we're treating landscapes?
I see a small shift, and I think it just requires that proverbial, we plant the seed and you have to keep watering it and keep watering it. I think that there's more education and realization, but it is really hard, say, for somebody in the heart of Albuquerque that maybe has no dirt around them to understand how all of these concepts impact them. And it does, right? Because some of Albuquerque's water comes from the Rio Grande, and if watersheds aren't healthy, then their water isn't healthy, and then it becomes a financial consideration, right? How much gets treated coming off the surface water, how much goes in the aquifer, all of those elements. But it's really hard for somebody in the heart of Albuquerque that just is a water user, right? Turns on the faucet every day and doesn't have to, maybe has xeriscape their landscape, doesn't really have other water usages. So that's where I think a lot of education and this constant reminding and ways of outreach to those New Mexicans can really help all of us have this conversation and all of us to be in it together, because we indeed are. The folks in Albuquerque, we're all New Mexicans, and we just have to work together. But it will require a lot of outreach, a lot of roundtable discussions. As I said, the state of New Mexico is entering this Water Security Planning Act phase, and that includes our urban areas, our rural areas, Middle Rio Grande, northern New Mexico, southern New Mexico, our Permian Basin areas, Farmington. I mean, all these various areas, we have to come together. And I hope that continues. And I do see that shift, but it also requires engagement and all of us to work. And I wish it was a little bit easier to get people to the table, but I'm hopeful that when people come to the table, they're coming with 2 ears so that they can listen as well.
So for those people listening who maybe aren't farmers, we all have to be engaged. How do ordinary people engage?
Well, ordinary people can engage in their local water utility. Almost all of New Mexico has soil water conservation districts. Engage in learning about the Water Security Planning Act through the Interstate Stream Commission. There's a webpage called mainstream.org. A lot of information is there, including the 50-year water plan for the state of New Mexico, as well as Tribal Water Working Group document that a lot of our pueblos and tribes worked on to support or to be in parallel with the 50-year water plan. And so I think being educated, reading, and engaged in this conversation. There's going to be Water Security Planning Act convenings all across the state of New Mexico here in the next year as those water planning areas get developed, as more information gets out on the street for that.
Phoebe Suina is founder and owner of High Watermark, a project management and environmental consulting company. You can find them on the web at high-watermark.com. Thank you so much for being with us on Down to Earth.
You're welcome. Thank you for the opportunity.
You've been listening to Down to Earth. We would love it if you would support this program, which you can do by going to patreon.com/down-to-earth planet to plate, where you can sign up for as little as $3. Patreon is Patreon. And also please rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. The Quivira Coalition is a not-for-profit and a community network of ranchers, farmers, conservationists, scientists, educators, and many others dedicated to regenerative practices that produce healthy food, support meaningful livelihoods, sustain biodiversity, and remedy the impacts of climate change. To learn more about Quivira and how you can support their work, visit quiviracoalition.org, Quivira. And finally, this show is a production with the Radio Cafe. You can check out radiocafe.org to hear back episodes of this show and also find all kinds of other shows on a wide variety of topics as well. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.